Hey guys, so I'm going to do a video for you. This video will help you understand Development 3 a little bit better. And I would like you all to take a really careful look at what you did on Development 3, because I think across the board, you want to level up so that you can have something that's ready for your research proposal. I didn't see anything that was ready for the research proposal. And not everybody, but in many cases, I would say that you didn't spend enough time on it. It looked like it was kind of a short, minimal effort for a lot of you. And so I'm thinking that maybe the reason why that is because you just feel like you don't understand what you're doing. And so let me give you more information to help you better understand what you're doing, and then you're more prepared to spend the amount of time needed on this. So I'm just going to go through it the way I would approach it on a brand new thing, and so you can just see my process of how I would go about doing this. So I'm thinking about a study, and the topic that pops into my mind is that of trembling, and trembling for the sake of helping with PTSD. So I ran across this idea some years ago by now, and I haven't really put any effort into doing a lot of research into it. Certainly not in terms of designing a study, but I think that it's the sort of thing where you could design a study to look at trembling. And what I want is a causal study. I want to design an experiment so that you can see how that works, because it's the most complicated thing to do. And so I thought I'll just give you an example of the most complicated thing to do, because then the other stuff is easier, right? All right, so if I'm looking at trembling, well, I first have to figure out, what do I look up? How do I find out more about this? I don't know very much about what it is. And so I do remember reading a little blurb about this, actually on Reddit, in a sub on Reddit that they called somatic experiencing sub, something like that. And so what I'm going to look up first is this idea of trembling, right? So you see, I looked it up really quickly. Somatic therapy. And then the person that I read it from was named Peter Levine, and he wrote a book called Waking the Tiger. Oh, and I have to share my screen with you. Yes, I do. So let me go back and share my screen. You can see what I'm doing. Okay, so here I am, just on Google, looking at somatic experiencing therapy, Peter Levine, right? So this gives me a little bit more information. Somatic experiencing, specific approach to somatic therapy. So somatic means body, developed by Dr. Peter Levine, based on the idea that traumatic experiences can lead to dysfunction in your nervous system. So in his book, Peter Levine talked about animals and how, like, I think he gave the example of tigers and lions. You know, the lion is not tigers, sorry, other striped things called zebras. Yeah, zebras. So lion is chasing the zebra, catches the zebra. The zebra is just immobilized with fear. But then the lion, let's say the lion is distracted by something or gets up and runs away for some reason. Then what happens to the zebra? The zebra doesn't have PTSD. And this is Peter Levine's point, is the zebra doesn't have PTSD. What the zebra does is it does a lot of trembling, and then it jumps up and runs off, and it's fine. It's not, doesn't have nightmares, etc. Okay, so he's saying there's something going on with this trembling, and one of his theories is that this immobilization kind of gets locked into you, locked into your cells even, and that trembling will do something, do something to help you. And so that's kind of where this idea of somatic experiencing comes from. And so what I'm interested then is, like, trembling, that's kind of an interesting idea. Asking people to tremble. What do? You ask them to tremble for a while and see if that helps their PTSD. So obviously I need to know more about this, but the first thing I want to know is what other research has been done, right? So I'm going to go to another window where I open up PubMed. So I'm going to pubmed.gov, and then this longer address, of course, pops up, but you can just type in pubmed.gov and you will get here. And so I want to look at some things. And so I could look at trembling. So I need to narrow this down, trembling and PTSD. What does that give us? We have 3 articles. Okay, mental health status of drivers. That's not what I'm looking for. Dementia conversion. This is a case study I can see because they're looking at one person. And I don't want a case study on dementia for trembling. That's not what I'm looking at. And here's panic disorder and Khmer refugees and sore neck syndrome. So that also is not what I'm looking for. So I'm thinking, okay, trembling. What if I'm looking up shivering? Could that be another thing? And it leads me to just the one article. Okay, so it doesn't give you a list if there's only one article. It just takes you straight to it. And here, this is another case study about one kid. And okay, so he's shivering here. And so this is not what I'm talking about. So I'm going to go back. I'm looking for PTSD. And so now I'm going to think, all right, so back when I was looking at the Google, there's this term somatic experiencing. Maybe that's what I need to look at. Maybe I need to use that term instead of trembling. So I go somatic experiencing, yes, that, and PTSD. Actually, let's go back. That first one, somatic experiencing for post-traumatic stress disorder. So great. This is exactly what I want. Okay. And I'm looking to do an experiment, a randomized controlled outcome study. This is exactly what I want. And look at this. It's available for free. How easy is that? I don't even have to track it down through the library. This is so easy. So I look at this article and then I read it, right? So I pause to read it and then I'm going to come back. Okay. So that's what we're doing. Pausing to read, coming back. Okay, so here I am again, sharing my screen back here with this article, and I'll tell you what I found out. So this was pretty cool. This is the first known randomized controlled study, okay? And it's in 2017. So this is pretty recent, this stuff, pretty recent. 2017 study looked at the effectiveness of somatic experiencing therapy. So that includes that trembling stuff. And so the abstract just gives me a kind of an overall idea of what's in the article. But I'm going to break down the article really quickly for you, because this is really useful in terms of designing my study. And so the first thing they talk about is PTSD, lots of research, lots of different treatments seem to be helpful. Okay, so that's their first paragraph. There are lots of treatments that seem to be helpful for PTSD, but nobody's looked at somatic experiencing, right? That's the first paragraph. The second paragraph is about somatic experiencing. This is what it is. Somatic experiencing, body-focused therapy, used for PTSD. It's unique because you're looking at body awareness integration, and you're creating this awareness of your inner physical sensations, kind of like mindfulness, really. And they're saying that the inner physical sensations are the carriers of the traumatic memory. And so here, the thing that's interesting is they're talking about memory, not just in the brain, but like throughout the whole entire body. And so then they talk about what's the theory of somatic experiencing and what it's all about. And that's what this paragraph is. So your client learns how to monitor arousal in the body and then down-regulate it. So to lower that arousal, using body awareness and applying self-regulatory mechanisms like, and so here's what he's saying here, self-regulatory mechanisms like engage in pleasant sensations, right? So I might drink a cup of warm tea. I might think about positive memories. I might take a bath. I might stand outside and in the wind if I like the wind. Other experiences that help regulate arousal. So the idea is calm, calm, calm. Now, he doesn't mention trembling here, but I know trembling is part of this. And so I'm going to have to do some more research to look at exactly what kind of trembling we're talking about. But the idea then, of course, would be trembling would help you regulate that arousal. Okay, so that's the second paragraph. The third paragraph, he says, kind of does this review on the effectiveness of somatic experiencing, and there's not much out there. So that's what he says. There's not much out there. But he does give examples of what is out there. And so here's the literature. Here's what is there. We're looking at survivors of a tsunami in this study. And then here's another tsunami intervention in another study. So they talk about that. So to quickly review the introduction, all we have is this. PTSD has been researched. There are lots of things that seem to help, but somatic experiencing hasn't really been looked at. Paragraph 2, this is what somatic experiencing is all about. Paragraph 3, here's what the literature has said about somatic experiencing. So we've got what it is, and then we've got, well, what are the data in the literature on it? And that's paragraph 3 and 4. And then here, this last paragraph is basically, we still need to look at the effectiveness of somatic experiencing. So the purpose of this study is looking at somatic experiencing in a randomized controlled study. Okay, so they told us, what is your study design? And so I'm thinking, yes, I would like to do this. This looks like a good plan for me. And so in my study, I want to do an experiment too. I want to do a randomized controlled trial. I want to do a randomized controlled trial of something like somatic experiencing, but maybe I can just carve out trembling and just look at trembling in my randomized controlled trial. And so if you look at this paragraph here, right here, this paragraph, this is a great model for my paragraph. Now, a model is different from cut and paste, right? You don't want to plagiarize. Using something as a model is not the same thing as plagiarizing. And so you have to say it in a really different way. So I can't just cut and paste that into my paper, but I can see how they said it. And so what I could say something about is the effectiveness of trembling has not yet been explored in a randomized controlled setting, right? And so the purpose of this study is to do a randomized controlled trial of the effectiveness of trembling on, and then I have to think, well, what is my outcome? On what? Am I doing it on your symptoms, on my number of nightmares, overall anxiety, heart rate variability? What are my outcomes? What do I want to measure to see if trembling even made a difference? Okay. So that requires more research, right? And I'm not going to go down that road right now with you, but I just want you to see that this isn't just coming out of your head. This has to come out of the data. This is not about making stuff up or thinking about, well, maybe this is how it works. This is about looking at what does the data say. Now, we've already looked at trembling in the literature, and we don't see anything specifically for trembling. We did see some things for somatic experiencing. So if I go back to my list here, I've got a lot of results, but they're not all about somatic experiencing. So here we've got low back pain, looking at the potential effects of this therapy. There's another low back pain, gender diverse gender. Okay. I haven't seen gender diverse very much. Okay. Using interoception and proprioception, those are kind of like awareness of sensations inside you. So there seems to be a fair number of good articles that I have to look at to get a better sense of what I'm doing here for somatic experiencing. And maybe one of them will talk about something like trembling. And so what I would do is I would continue reading those articles. Now, what you can do is I could make this my list of articles to integrate for next week's assignment. Because next week, what you're going to do is, or this very week, you're integrating these articles together so that they say something cohesive. And so it makes sense that I would just use this for my development interaction for this week. Okay. But I'm going to come back to this idea of what do I do next? So I'm going to stop the share and then reshare Microsoft Word. I don't know what's on there now, so try to ignore it. Okay. Oh, this was just for my this week for you guys. All right. So my first paragraph is the study design. So this study is an experimental design involving a randomized, randomized controlled trial of an intervention called trembling in a population, or how about a sample, in a sample of people with PTSD. Okay, so that's telling you what the study is. It doesn't have to be long. It could be more than 1 or 2 sentences. But right now this says it's kind of all the information you need: an experimental design, randomized control of trembling in a sample of people with PTSD. Okay. You're going to give people more information about it in your introduction. This is really the last paragraph or last sentence of your introduction for your research proposal. Okay. And then the next thing we're supposed to do is come up with a measure, right? And so I can't just invent a measure, because my measure has to have reliability and validity. It has to really measure what it means that it's going to measure. If I just say, well, do you think it helped to a bunch of people? I'm not going to get any scientific respect for that. So I'm going to go back to, let's see, we're going to stop this share and we're going to share back to Chrome. Where did that go? Okay. So the next thing we're looking for is the measure. So if I go back to this study that I just read, I will tell you about the rest of it. Okay. So, and this is really a great model for everything you're doing. You can look at this study, read through it. If you understand what this study is doing and what the different elements are, that will really help you when you write your own research proposal. I cannot emphasize enough how critical it is that you read a lot of articles. Then you get a good sense of what you're talking about. Okay, so you have to read them. You can't skip over that and think that you're going to be able to do it. It just won't work. You have to read them. You have to do the work, put in the struggle to read them. So participants, this describes the participants. It says the study went over 3 years. They had 63 participants, and they had eligibility requirements, and they had to be over 18. They had to be fluent in either Hebrew or English because of where it was that they were doing the study. And it tells a little bit about the procedure. Now, here, I would have asked you to put this in the procedure, not in the participants, but sometimes people do it different ways. And you know, this is how they published it. So here they're giving a description of what all the demographic experiences are, or characteristics, sorry, of the people. So you know what the participants are, and it talks about what kinds of trauma that they had. And then they talk about the procedure, which I'm going to skip right now because that's not our focus for this assignment. And then they go down to, wow, procedure, long procedure, right? Then we go to measures. And so here we've got 4 measures, 4 paragraphs, 1 paragraph per measure. And so the first thing they do is they evaluate their symptoms of PTSD with the CAPS scale. Okay, clinician administered, right here, clinician administered PTSD scale. Then they give the reference for that scale, right? Whoops, right there, there's their in-text reference. And they're using the Hebrew version, and they have to say, look, and the Hebrew version is good. And then this is what the CAPS is. Now look how useful this is. This is the kind of information I want from you. So not just, well, this is what I'm going to use the CAPS, but this is what the CAPS is. It's 30 items. It's a structured interview. It corresponds to the criteria for PTSD. It's the gold standard in PTSD assessment. You know, and so it tells a number of sentences about what the CAPS is. And so instead of just wondering, I don't know what that is, are you drawing pictures? Are you answering questions? Is it paper and pencil? Is it an interview? What is it? So now I know exactly what it is. And this is the kind of thing I want from you when you talk about your measure. Here's 3 more examples. So they use the Hebrew version of the structured clinical interview for DSM-4. We call that the SCID. And this actually helped them with inclusion criteria. So they gave everyone the SCID, And it talks about, well, what is the skid? It's a semi-structured interview. It looks at this. All of this stuff is about what the skid is. And you can feel free to pause this recording anytime and take a better look at what this is. Same thing down here, the PTSD, the post-traumatic diagnostic scale, the PDS. Same thing, lots of information, right? And then lastly, we're looking at depression, lots of information about the scale that they're using. This is what I want from you. Look at the depth of information, find that information for your scale. It can't be very hard because your scales are in the literature. And then put it in your own words. Don't cut and paste, okay? Because that's, again, plagiarism. All right, so for measures, I have to decide what measures am I really looking at for trembling. And then once I decide those measures, I will write them down in that format on my paper, okay? And so let's say I decide that I want to measure depression, and I think it would be useful to measure arousal or something like that. So then I'm going to look for a measure of anxiety or arousal, right? So measure for anxiety arousal. Let's see what happens. How do you measure emotional arousal? Well, physiological signs, that's a good idea. I like that. You know, what if I can look at something like heart rate variability? That might be kind of cool. Help you, you know, how easily can you calm down? What about just general heart rate? That would be good. Skin conductance is a thing. You can look at skin conductance. You can get measures that are like, what are they called? Devices that you can hook up to, like your fingers, etc., to measure skin conductance, and that tells us a lot about arousal and anxiety, physiological arousal, cognitive anxiety, etc. So I would look here to kind of review what is out there in terms of a measure for arousal. And then I look up information about it so I can describe that measure thoroughly in my paper, in my development interaction. That's the next thing I do. That's number 2. Okay. And I'm not going to do it for the sake of time. I think that I've given you enough information so that you can go do it. And then the last thing I want to do is describe my participants. And so again, if you go back to this article and you look at participants, you know, it's more than one sentence, more than 2 sentences. It doesn't have to be a lot. It could be 3 or 4 sentences, maybe, depending on how easy it is to describe your participants. Now here, they've already collected this data, so they can say a lot more about the participants. You're not going to have collected the data ever. And so you can't say as much as they're saying, but you can talk about exclusion and inclusion criteria. You can talk about age, you can talk about gender, you can talk about where you're going to find these people, how are you going to recruit them? And how do you know that your participants are representative enough of the general population of what you're interested in, that your study will have external validity? In other words, what I want is for the participants in my study to be representative of people with PTSD, so that I know that this trembling intervention might work for general people with PTSD. Okay, so put in plenty of information about your participants, how you're going to find them, how you're going to recruit them, and think about it in terms of what makes sense for your study. And so if I want to apply this trembling thing to college age students, then I'm going to look for college age students who have PTSD. There's no point in giving a trembling intervention to students who don't have PTSD, right? I mean, it might help them, but it's not going to be useful for my study, really. And so the first thing I want is a group of college students who have PTSD. So how am I going to find that, right? So I have to recruit for that and make sure that there's some exclusion or inclusion criteria about whether or not they have PTSD. And then I might want to know more information. Like I might want to know that they're like half of them are men and half of them are women. Who knows if there's a different effect of trembling on gender? We don't know. I could make that part of my study as long as I have enough men and enough women to analyze separately. So I'll probably need at least 30 in both groups. Then I could probably do that. And so those are the kinds of things I'm going to think about when I'm looking at the participants. Now, I know this has been a way longer video, but I wanted to do it all in one take so that you could see what works to create this kind of a development interaction. And I hope it helped you. And if it didn't, or if you're still, well, I mean, I'm sure it did help you a little bit, but if you still have questions, please just contact me and we'll chat about it and I will help you. All right. Take care.